Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Uh, Good afternoon for everyone, and especially for our Honorable Dean, Professor Nina, and all the lecturers, the head MA Study Program, Associate Professor Butati, and all of the lecturers, and of course to the our guest lecturer here, um, Professor Ananta Kumargiri, PhD. Good afternoon. And to all of the students here for PhD and MA students program. So today we're going to have lunch talk and discussing about learning the art of wholeness, integrate education and beyond. So it's a very interesting topic, and without further ado, let's give our dean times to do opening speech. So for our beloved Professor Nina, so time is yours.
Shahid. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Shahid, to be moderator today. Alhamdulillah alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala Muhammadin Sayyidil Mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Good afternoon, everyone. We have Pak Dadi Darmadi from the media. Thank you for coming. And also for all the lectures, Ibu Tati, Pak Andar, Bu Destina, Bu Afifa, Pak Nirwan, Bu Dika, Pak Lukman, sorry. You are the one, the first one I met you. Thank you all for coming. Let's pray for Pak Bambang's recovery and Mbak Fitria, who is sick at the moment. I hope, well, they recover soon. Yeah, we miss Pak Bambang a lot if you usually around. Okay, so I'm glad to see you again after missing from the Triple IU to visit Melbourne. It's almost a month, and last month lunch talk. I'm grateful to Ibu Tati who have given the speech on my behalf because, well, even if I'm away, if it is possible for me to give a speech online, I usually do that. But at that Tuesday, I had a meeting with the Dean of the Faculty of Education at the University of Melbourne to discuss about the dual degree that we will have with between Faculty of Education at Triple IU and the Faculty of Education at the University of Melbourne. Yeah. About learning the art of wholeness, yeah, integral education and beyond. I think this is a very important topic, especially about wholeness, because in the current era, people tend to see the problems in partial way, yeah. So wholeness approach is very important. So if I compare it with the approach in reading the Quran, for example, because I studied also about hermeneutics and then approach in reading the Quran. So the wholeness approach is like reading the Quran from the helicopter view. Yeah, so we can see the big picture of the Quran, not reading it in a piecemeal basis, which can be very dangerous. Yeah, especially for example, some people are only highlight that okay in Islam inheritance for women is half of that man, and men can have more than one wife. So if people highlight that nitty gritty without seeing the wholeness, the main message of the Quran, which is to stand for justice, people will lose. yeah, the understanding of the main purpose of sending the Quran. Yeah. So today we will listen from Professor Giri about uh, the art of wholeness that I'm also looking forward to listen to his speech. So without further ado, I will end my uh, welcoming speech to him. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, so thank you for Professor Nena for the opening speech. But before we start to discuss or learn about those topics, let me try to introduce briefly our guest today. So his name is Professor Ananta Kumargiri. He got a PhD in US, but he also got two master's degree in sociology and also anthropology. The first master's degree he got from Delhi, and the other one also got from the America. So there are a lot of books that Professor have here. It's more than 10 or 20, but one of them is The Calling of Global Responsibility, New Initiative in Justice, Dialogues and Planarity Releases. And so it's published in Routledge on 2023. Um, yeah, I think that's the brief introduction. So let's give the time to Professor to deliver the speech about the wholeness. So for Professor Ananta, time is yours. So much, Asia, Professor Luna, Dr. Alpha,
and all friends go present this blessed and beautiful afternoon as our dear and respected Dean, Professor Nina, challenged us to realize our contemporary condition and our contemporary condition of fragmentation. For example, while not only reading the Quran, but being with the Quran. And how are we being with the Quran? As you know, Quranic studies is a very important part of education. But how do we study Quran? As our respected Deccan has said, there is a reality of fragmented location. For example, as the Holy Quran has been read by male, M-A-L-E, but once women have started reading the Quran, and then that male location reading of Quran is now being supplemented and transformationally transformed when many more people start reading Quran with their own agency. So linking to Ibu, Professor Professor Nina's linking to the challenge of wholeness is that realize that each one of us, we are located, partial location in human condition. To be born with life is to be born with partial beginning, isn't it? But our partial beginning is not our destiny. Our partial beginning is already part of an interconnected wholeness which we do not realize. The task of education, as in the Holy Quran, it is Ikra. In fact, Ikra or education is the word that is most used in the Holy Quran compared to other words. The task of Ikra is the task of education in all traditions, whether it is paideia in the Greek tradition, and the whole pedagogy of paideia is very different from the modern notion of education. Again, Paideia always was acknowledging learning the wholeness of which we are part, Paideia. Or, for example, another initiative in education in the modern world, Bildung, the Bildung way of learning, and the German thinkers and educational practitioners like Humboldt made a deep contribution to it. And modern education has learned quite a lot from this Bildung education, which means that education is the formation of the person, not just a small little technical learning that we get. As Professor Nina is studying about higher education, but in the modern world, there are two different models of higher education. The Bildung tradition from the German space, Humboldtian Bildung vision, which was much more holistic, and the Napoleonite, the vision of the Polytechnic, which was very much skill oriented. And today, the crisis of education, for example, higher education, is a struggle between the two only. As we can see everywhere, education is becoming very technical, very focused on small little things. And because of the condition where we are, but today, that also is coming to a crisis. Today, we realize that our contemporary world is going through what is called as holy crisis. And it is not just the crisis of climate, there is a crisis of established state, nation state, educational institutions. And one fundamental crisis is the crisis of disciplinarity. And that crisis of disciplinarity is not isolated from the institutional crisis of education. Because in the modern world, the educational institutions was created for a very narrow-minded purpose. Okay. And mainly a little bit of mentalistic education. And I invite you to realize that in modern education, we are tied to chair and table. Okay. Modernity says, if we read modernity with the eyes of Foucault, but Foucault may not have written this, but I would like to add to this notion of discipline and punish by realizing that in modernity, in education, we are, instead of being free, we are tied, we are chained to chair and table. Okay, right from the kindergarten to the university studies. But the plurality of educational practice, like Islamic world, Indic world, suggests that to educate, first of all, the bounded classroom is not the only space of education. Rabindranath Tagore, the great experimenter of education, who came to Indonesia, and he built Santiniketan. And there in Santiniketan, even now, okay, now, there are children studying from kindergarten up to 12th standard. There is no classroom. They study not under the tree, but with the tree. This is a reality. Therefore, this whole classroom and that kind of closed classroom and being tied to chair and table, which is kind of valorized as the only model of education, we have to interrogate that. And when we are talking about education and sustainable development, like the sustainable development goal, education is one of the goals. But how do we realize the UN sustainable development goal vis-a-vis education unless we interrogate this Eurocentric and modernistic model of education? We need to pluralize the practice of education and learning the art of wholeness, linking to the conversation that was begun by Professor Nina, is to realize some of these challenges. With that, we come to the task of learning the art of this. Beginning with this poem, before that, Sri Aurobindo, a great educational practitioner and freedom fighter from India, who, along with the mother, his spiritual collaborator, they have practiced the vision and practice of integral education, where as our life, human life, consists of at least these five dimensions, along with many others. One is the physical, the second is the vital, our emotional, vital, emotional. The third is the psychic, and the psychic relates to the soul dimension, like jiva, you know. There is a cafe here, Jimba, Jiva Jinja, Padadi, and then mind and this ritual. Sri Aurobindo writes, this wide world kindergarten schools where the infant spirit learns through mind and sense to read the letters of the cosmic script and search for the secret meaning of the whole. Sri Aurobindo writes about it in Victory. In a way, each one of us, we are not best of this challenge. For example, reading the secret meaning of the whole. Even if we are studying, say, leadership education or, for example, multicultural education that our dear Professor Alpha does, and many other specific subjects that we are doing, along with our specific subject, what is the secret meaning of the whole? Moving on then, education is not just great lesson, is one of the eternal companion of our educational practice. This used to do, he used to ask questions. It is in that spirit, oh friend, oh dear soul, you asked the embers of my heart. Our questions are not only questions, nor are bumps of the swords. Our questions are flows, one and many, flows of hearts. In between us, our questions are our stories, bathing together and searching together, of being drowned and rising again. One aspect of learning as bathing together, I'm giving this metaphor as Indonesia as an archipelago. It is not just roads that are there, but the seafarer. So today, education where it accompanies traveling education. In EU, as you know, Erasmus program. In fact, I see part of the world digital formation. The countries, the Latin countries in Lithuania or Estonia are into these countries. Think of, on the one hand, Lithuania, on the other hand, Malta. Now, what weaves it together, because EU is two regional transnational formation, it is the educational program. No matter where you study, one semester are required in another university. It requires a pedagogic dynamics, and this pedagogic dynamics has to begin not only from the state, because the kind of the little autonomy that educational institutions have, they can also initiate these processes. Oh, okay. The next one is not moving. Yeah. So wholeness is a reality as well as a multidimensional project of realization of our lives. But many a time we suffer from illusion of our fragmentary existence, which most of the time is produced by socio-cultural and educational systems, which is based on and gives primacy to short-sighted fragmentation of life. We also suffer from a totalitarian production of wholeness, where wholeness is produced in a totalizing manner by totalitarian systems in self, culture, society, and the state. Educational systems and learning processes, societies, and histories have often suffered from such elusive and totalizing and tantalizing wholeness. In this context, we need to cultivate a new and creative path of wholeness where we learn to realize the wholeness that is there in our lives, and the parts that we have become realized, becoming garland of an emerging and emergent wholeness. That means each one of us as part, as our body become part of a garland of wholeness of being. For example, as in the school, we learn about both physical education, emotional education, and education of the mind, but also education of the spirit. Education of the spirit has not been much emphasized in modern education. That is a work many educational initiatives are doing. For example, I would give you the example of the Rudolf Steiner world of education, about which I would speak a bit. Also in Sri Aurobindo Mother Integral Education and educational initiatives, there are education. For example, I was visiting Africa here, and I was visiting Zimbabwe, and near the Great Victoria Falls. And there I was leaving the city in the afternoon. I saw a school. But this school doors, along this school has a hut, a circular hut, a hut in a Japanese village, and an African hut. That is a circular hut, and where it tells students, that is a space for students and teachers also to come every day. Think of our educational spaces, place like this. And that place is where we read computer. And that school also is an agricultural field associated with that. How many have an agricultural field associated with that? So about agriculture, because today, later on say, that one of the challenge, there is an unhealthy industry in the, and that is the junk food, isn't it? So how do we then link education as a space, not only to learn mathematics, along with learning mathematics, how to also learn how to prepare food. Here, another school in Luxembourg in 2007, I was there, or rather I should put 2010, and I was part of a dialogue there called Learning Across Boundaries, initiated by the Education Department, and that was visited by some of the great minds of the world. For example, Roy Bhaskar, the great philosopher, who has talked about critical realism, and there is a lot of work in education on Bhaskar's idea of critical realism. and then also integral education from another thinker from USA, and also another great Latin American thinker. His name is Edmond Dussel. All these people had come. Along with that, I visited when I was staying with my friend. Early morning, I saw this young boy in Luxembourg in cold weather like this. He's doing yoga. You know what is yoga? He's doing yoga. And I was surprised. I asked him, where did you learn yoga? He said, I learned it from my school. And then I expressed a wish, let me visit this school. And his father, he himself is a great educationist. His name is Marcus Molch, and he has co-edited a book on integral education with an Australian friend, and he brought me. And we came to the school. I saw, along with many interesting initiatives, there is a program of laboratory kitchen in this school. And there is a kitchen which is called laboratory kitchen. Each of these classes have 1 or 2 periods in the laboratory kitchen. Think of, uh, if we are talking the learning the art of wholeness, how then in a place like laboratory kitchen, it is also a place for overcoming another important dualism between mind and body, isn't it? And also gender, today one of the great challenge of gender equality still persistent in India and Indonesia is that women to cook and men to men to sit down. But how do we plant the seed of an integral learning in the school where the boys and girls are taught how to cook together? And it is not just cooking, it is the cooking the spirit of life. And in the process of cooking, you also learn mathematics, chemistry, and physics, thermodynamics, and So, moving on, then many educational movements in society and history challenges us to realize the learning and education as a process of cultivation of wholeness in self, culture, societies, and the world. Among these movements, one such movement is integral education movement, which draw inspiration from Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Practitioners of integral education believe that through integral education and yoga, they can contribute to the evolutionary transformation from mental to a supramental stage. Then another example is Rudolf Steiner and his idea and the Steiner Waldorf movement. I would later on, I would tell more about how they work, beginning in Germany, in Stuttgart around 1919. Now, after 100 years, Steiner Waldorf School works almost in many countries around the world. I do not know whether there is a Steiner Waldorf School in Indonesia, but I have visited one in Thailand and many other countries. Also, there is another initiative in education in Denmark inspired by NFS Grundtvig, who was a bishop, and Christian Kold, who was a grassroots educational teacher around 1840. I have done field work on integral schools in Pondicherry, India, several schools in Odisha, India, and also field work with Waldorf Steiner schools in Germany and USA, Norway, and Thailand. I have studied free schools in Denmark, mainly in Copenhagen, and visited other experiments in child-centered education, as well as government schools in other cities such as Aalborg. With all this, the challenge is that unless we realize and practice the art of wholeness, then we are stopping the evolution that is happening. We are not contributing to the evolutionary dynamics that needs to happen. For example, we realize today we have to move from disciplinary boundaries to transdisciplinarity. That is also an education of wholeness. For example, how we in our education as a subject also is transdisciplinary to some extent, like philosophy, sociology, anthropology. But how not only education as a field, each one of us, similarly Islamic studies, is transdisciplinary to some extent. But all disciplines are becoming transdisciplinary. So how do we plant that seed of transdisciplinarity in our educational field, not only at the higher education, but also at the primary school? In fact, if we look at the educational practice in primary school, now in some educational initiatives like the one teacher, and that teacher would teach almost all the subject, like starting from kindergarten. Then when that group comes to class 1, the teacher would move to class 1. Therefore that teacher, while studying many subjects, is already becoming transdisciplinary to some extent. Similarly, the children are also so we need to practice this kind of transdisciplinary learning even at the primary school. For example, science teaching. Now, if you are bringing children, creative science education at the primary level is to bringing children to the field, to a river, to the water place. And while doing that, if you are trying to bring children to look at the water, then not only looking at the chemistry of water or science of water, you also sing them songs, Javanese poetry about water. Because our education, as it deals with these 5 elements, what are these 5 elements? Earth, air, water, isn't it? Sky, ether. Now, interestingly, in modern education, while these 5 elements are the foundations of our life, there is very little knowledge about this, except you when you go higher up, you study a bit about fire, in the science class. But there is no education of these elements which constitute us. And therefore water is not just a chemical molecule, H2O. Water is the spirit of life. In the Bible it is written, the Holy Spirit, the holy water. Similarly, in the whole in the Quran, in the Islamic tradition, water is sacred. No, so therefore, how do we create a practice of learning? Starting from the primary school to the higher up, and that education become an education of wholeness via the learning with the elements which constitutes life. So then we can draw inspiration, some paragraphs of thought, like, for example, Rudolf Steiner, The Renewal of Social Organism, writes, we should not ask, what does a person need to know or be able to do in order to fit into the existing social order? Instead, we should ask what lives in each human being and what can be developed in him or her. Next one is from Janusz Korczak. Have you heard about Janusz Korczak? So Janusz Korczak is a very, very deep story of humanity. And in 2005, there was a cold evening, and I was walking in the streets of Warsaw in Poland, and I was asking, where is the school that Janusz Korczak had built? And Janusz Korczak's story is that Janusz Korczak was a great pediatrician, the children's doctor, but he was also a great story writer. And how important story is in the educational practice, I'll just tell you a little bit about that later. Later on, I would give reference to a great contemporary educationist who has written a book called Storying. And she is making a distinction between storytelling and storying. Because while in storytelling, we are telling a stories, but in storying, I myself is becoming a story. I have that paragraph, I'll show you a little later. But Korchak built a orphanage or a children's school, and Korchak was Jewish, and then he was under threat from the Nazi occupation of Warsaw and Poland. And there was already notice that he is going to be arrested. But on the last day, before he was going to be arrested, he did a play, he did a drama along with the children. And what was that drama? That drama was the drama called Postman, written by Rabindranath Tagore. And Korchak went with him. And then when he was about to board, the soldier saw he recognized, he said, I have told your story to my child last night. I would not like to send you to this train. Korchak said, no, I would accompany my children to the very last end. And you know what happened. The train went to the station and they were brought to the concentration camp. So today, if we bring that story and pose the question of children in Gaza now and what is happening, and how, the schools are being bombed and many, but difficulty of, of annihilation, terror, how still the spirit of the school survives. And Korchak says, children are not only the people of tomorrow, but are people of today. They have a right to be taken seriously and to be treated with tenderness and respect. And Chittaranjan Das is another great experimenter of education. And he built a school called the School of Life in Odisha, India. He writes almost all over the world as people are becoming more and more aware of the gods that have foiled them. The heroic in them is searching for alternatives. Like Janus Korchak, educational field has many heroic who are searching for alternatives. And Andre Ghosh, he's a sociologist, and what he writes is very interesting. His writing, this cannot be taught, it has to be stimulated. It can arise only out of the effective attachment of children or adolescents to a reference group who makes them feel deserving of unconditional love. It is in this context, crisis of education, our educational systems are in a crisis now. This is evident in all levels of education from the primary to the higher. And it is in this context we try to learn the art of wholeness. But this wholeness that we are learning also exists in the context of many wholes. We live with holes, Holes. There are also many holes in our educational boat today, and the water is leaking. But from these holes, how do we make holes? And that also means interrogating the top-down approach to education. For example, one aspect of the top-down approach not being followed is that in many educational spaces, the distinction between teacher and taught, teacher and student, is being transformed to a practice how each one of us, teacher is not just a teacher is also a co-learner. And for example, I can give you, in Islam also, there is a great, thinker, practitioner from India. His name is Dara Sukho, who translated the Quran to Persian. And the name of that book, Majma'ul Baharin. And Darasuko also has written a book called The Compass of Truth, where he is writing, whenever you are in search for knowledge, realize that there is no murid or peer. Each one of us are friend. So therefore, there is a tradition of learners being friends in all traditions. Therefore, the modern top-down approach needs to be interrogated also in practices like the school in Denmark, Bifrost, where the teacher is not called teacher. The teacher is just called an adult. And also in the integral schools in Odisha, the teachers are addressed not as sir and madam, but as brothers and sisters. And this linguistic transformation is very important. Allow me to link it to how today that linguistic transformation is very important. For example, gender. Now, most of our language is very gendered. And that gendered language is not innocent. There is a kind of inferiorizing of our language towards the women, women and the low caste and the marginalized. So the crisis of education, therefore, must address a language of respect, And here, when we address our teacher, not just as sir and or pa, and of course, pa and ibu have different connotation, but as friends. It is in this context, integral education, Sri Aurobindo says that there are three principles of education. The first principle of education is that nothing can be taught. The second principle of education is mind has to be consulted in its own growth. The third principle is to work from the near to far, from that which is to that which shall be. So in my slides, I have quite a lot about the vision and practice of integral education, but I would be quick in referring only to a few of them. And for example, how in integral education, there is also emphasis on vital education and education of emotions, and how this is very crucial. I want to draw your attention to this book that I found in our beautiful UI Tiga library, and it is called The School of Life, an Emotional Education. And please mark what this writer is writing. He's writing, we are in terms of wisdom little more advanced than the ancient Sumerians or the Picts. We have the technology of an advanced civilizations balancing precariously on an emotional base that has not developed much since we dwelt in caves. And he is going on to write that how our education focuses mainly on learning mathematics, learning computer, but we are never, taught how to learn emotional qualities, like how can we listen, how can we be kind, And in fact, mercy, Rahman, is one of the flow of Islam. Bismillahir Rahim. But how do we become Rahim? How do we practice Karuna? And these are also practices of education in that sense that, that how can we as educator, we can have creative pedagogical processes, because we do not learn how to be kind by being advised to be kind, isn't it? There are different pedagogical processes of being kind. So here, how integral education, then integral education, for example, as a practice in Odisha, I have visited many schools, and these schools are community initiated schools, 600 such schools. Now, different people who draw inspiration from the mother and the Sri Aurobindo. They build such schools. They are not funded by the government. And the great disjunction is in 2009, Government of India, it initiated a very important bill called Right to Education. That means that all children up to 10th standard, they would be into school. They have right to education. But right to education does not, what it has really led to, that each of the school, no matter it is government or private, you need to be satisfied by the governmental bureaucracy. Okay. But government has not accepted that each one of the school, whether it is started by the private or the government has to support that school, isn't it? Because there are some private schools which are built by industrialists like Birla and Tata. You might have heard about them. And they have very high commodity kind of schools, So they can fulfill all the criteria. For example, creating a ramp in your school. But for a community initiated school, it's not easy. Government should fund that. There is no funding. So what Right to Education has done, it has led to sorry, it has led to more, it has led to much more governmental control. But still, these schools are working and they are trying to put of integral education like body, mind, spirit, but they have a lot of challenges. One challenge is experimental crisis. In this paragraph, no, it's fine. In this paragraph, I write that how educational creativity requires educational experiment, isn't it? So, integral schools were built 50 years ago, but now they have to be much more creative. One of the issues I am raising is that integral schools, they also need to learn more about other such holistic education like Rudolf Steiner, okay, and Kristen Cole, and they should have an institute for teachers training where along with learning the pedagogy from Mother and Sri Aurobindo, they can also learn transversally from other initiatives. And today, for example, there are very interesting initiatives in earth-based education. In 2005, I was visiting Mexico, in the higher northern side of Mexico, a part of Mexico called San Cristobal La Casas. And I met a father who has built a university called University de Tierra, means University of the Earth. In Bali, there is an art school, you know that. There is a very famous art school in Bali where the architecture is bamboo architecture. So all these things today is that how we would have to have experimental creativity in our educational learning. Here, then I give you example of the folk high school in Denmark, where uh, Christian Cole, he is one of the founder of the folk high school. He writes, for far too little attention has been given in teaching according to the child's abilities through focusing on developing the intellect which has not yet maturity instead of working through imagination which is already present. The reason for this can probably be found in the conscious or unconscious mistaken belief that the child is an animal which through disciplining and education will turn into a human being. In his little book on children's school, Cole discusses two approaches to teaching children, the systematic and catechistic and storytelling. In the systematic method, one teaches a subject in a systemic way, and in storytelling method, one teaches children by telling stories. Today, I want to propose that learning the art of wholeness should follow a storing method, not only in teaching literature and humanities and history, but also in teaching science. Because our education is suffering from what the great thinker C.P. Snow called the two cultures. One is the culture of science and culture of arts. Therefore, STEM subject, the so-called brilliant subjects, opt for STEM subjects, and the other, but we have to bring together science, art, and culture together. And it is in that spirit uh, we would have to have a storytelling method even in science education. Then, beyond the fetishism of the written word, that means what it means that though in education the written word is important, okay, modernity gives primacy to the written, but the oral also has to be cultivated. Because what has happened today in many classes, we spent a lot of time in making children to write, isn't it? And today in higher education, most of us, we are required to write papers, isn't it? Now our professor friends here, they would be spending sleepless nights whether our paper has been published in Scopus journal or not. Earlier, where when you visited Harvard and other places, even in Harvard, there were great teachers, who would just spend hours and hours in with you in talking, and that would not be recorded in Scopus index paper, isn't it? So therefore, today there is a compulsion towards the written, and most of this written is really absurd. It is really banal. If you look at most of the written papers, 99% of them are production of banality or reproduction of banality. But education is not just writing papers. Education is telling stories, being lost in conversations. I think in Java, there is a very little, very interesting practice of that, when you just meet and speak together. So then I also say that how it requires a new kind of teachers training education, like in this folk high school movement, there are alternative teachers training schools, because as Marx said, who is going to educate the educators? Because our conventional educational work is done by teachers who are produced by teachers training college in a conventional way. We need new teachers training colleges. Then in this school, as this paragraph says, that there are two kinds of gymnastics. One is in Denmark, there is a school which follows a gymnastics which is called Swedish gymnastics, where in the gymnastics, in the competition, sports competition, there is more value on cooperation rather than competition. Then I speak more about Bifrost and qualitative learning process, dialogues at Bifrost, education as dens of insights, then a little bit more on free schools in Denmark. What are these free schools? Free schools are an important part of educational reality of Denmark. Many school-going children from kindergarten up to 9th, 10th grow to free schools. These schools are free in the sense that they have emerged out of initiatives of parents and not controlled by the state. Then quickly I would come to Rudolf Steiner schools, time being short. Rudolf Steiner Waldorf School. In Rudolf Steiner's vision, human beings are energetic. Telling is important in Waldorf schools as it is in the Grundtvig cold free schools. Diane Dumke is an inspiring storyteller whom I met and in my field work, who lives in Walvis in Germany. Cold, she writes that she says in world of education we have movement in the beginning and tell the story at the end. In the first class, we have stories like Sleeping Beauty. In the second class, we have fables. Sharing with us his experience of being a wildlife guide in Africa. Sharing with us his experience of being a Waldorf school teacher. One knows everything, except that they know what is right for children. But instead of being a sovereign, I learned how to be an authentic teacher. I had to find out what is my authentic contact with children. You must know that there are souls in front of you. These souls may be better developed. That means when I am a teacher, I am meeting a student. It is not just my physical being. Steiner believed also in the quality of the souls. The souls that are in front of me, they may be better developed than myself as a teacher. I'm coming to an end in 5 minutes. So, storytelling as pedagogical practice, some more reflections. Ambika Gopal Raj and Saran Ulanov, Storing a Reflexive Praxis for Pedagogy. I was telling you about this book, and Ambika Gopal Raj writes, I cannot remember when I began using the word storing rather than storytelling. All I remember is that when I used the word storing, it felt right. Then moving on quite quickly, I would also tell you about this very important thing, that when we are storing, there is the performative, and how important the performative in the learning dynamics. In fact, some of our ideal teachers are also who are performers. Performers not in terms of Bollywood actors, like everybody when I meet, oh, Shah Rukh Khan, and it's not like that. But the performer as a example of life. Judith Butler, in her study of gender, she talks about how the performative becomes an occasion for turning things around. In fact, her sister, Diana, she is my dear friend, so lives in Bali. She is the sister of the great thinker Judith Butler. And so the performative in the sense is that, therefore, learning is the sense of the performative. And when we perform a sense of rasa, and here I draw your attention to rasa theory from Indian tradition. And what this writer is saying, rasa theory, as explained in the Natya Shastra, says that when a performer of any art is so deeply immersed in their performative that their soul becomes one with the performative act, then they are able to transport the audience into a consciousness of awareness that is akin to spirituality. There forms a deep temporal impenetrable connection within the world of the performative act, where each feels what I can call emotional truth. And therefore, education age learning journey with emotions, also what is emotional truth in the context of, as you know, today there is assault on truth as post-truth, and there is no truth. Of course, that is a challenge for us to move away from a priori absolutist truth, but that does not mean that there is no relational truth. Linking it to anthropology very quickly, Clifford Geertz, the great anthropologist, also anthropologist, wrote Religion of Java. Geertz has a very important essay called Anti-Relativism, which means that though education is not just relativistic in a naive sense, that because I am born as a girl in Africa, therefore we should support female circumcision. Not like that. Because I am born as a girl in Pakistan or Afghanistan, therefore we would have to support the educational policy of not letting children come to school. Not like that. Today, education cannot be relativistic in that way. But still, what George is saying, that how do we become relative without becoming that kind of life-killingly relativistic? I propose the path of relational relativity. It is in that sense that the truth that education has to teach is kind of a relational relativity truth through emotional truth. As this writer is saying, I conceptualize emotional truth to be the perception of authenticity that is passed along from the teller to the listener, creating a space that validates and builds the trust for all involved. Um, then I would come to the very end of it. Just wrapping up. I just want to tell you about another very interesting initiative in Netherlands. One such is Adventuring, a school in Holland near Apeldoorn. The school is an adventure started by Mikhail and his wife in collaboration with like-minded teachers and parents. Mikhail and his family stay on one room in the school campus, and it is a self-run school with the help of parents, teachers, and students. The school does not have any set syllabus. Students choose what they wish to study and they seek help from each other. Then finally, as we are talking about learning the art of fullness, some hard facts of life like standardization, evaluation is still today the challenge, because while on the one hand there is a challenge for learning the art of wholeness, our educational infrastructure today also is becoming much more mechanical and standardizing. Look at, for example, the PISA test in Europe. Now, everybody is giving the example of Finland is the most educationally developed country in the world. But in Finland, education is not just a standardized test. I have visited Finland, but what is the kind of social practice of education where educational excellence is cultivated in a garden, it is an ecology of educational creativity rather than just test. So therefore, it requires a new cultural revolution, because today, with all the challenges, still we are still becoming prisoner of a very mechanical model of education. So therefore, integral education today via Sri Gandhi, Sri Aurobindo Tagore, it has to integral the horizontal and the vertical. Also integral education climate care movement. And here, very quickly, I want to relate to the crisis of science, positivism, and colonialism by saying that today, I'll just complete in 2 minutes, please. I want to tell you the 5 turning points that is happening. One is, one is the crisis of positivism. And then we have to have a new relationship between science, culture, and spirituality, the linguistic turn, the feminist turn, the ecological turn, also the onto-decolonial turn and spiritual turn. Along with all this is also learning the heart of wholeness is also interrogate the colonizing model of education, what Paulo Freire called the banking model. And Indonesia, India, Africa, all of us are still struggling with not only colonialism as history, but colonialism as an entrenched colonial practice today. And then we also have to talk about another 5 turnaround, the Club of Rome, a very important world body, which talked about limits to growth. Now, 3 years ago, it has come out with a very important challenge before humanity called the 5 turnaround, turning poverty around, the inequality turnaround, the empowerment turnaround, achieving gender equity, the food turnaround, making food system health for the people and planet, and the energy turnaround. For example, talking about energy and green energy, now how our schools would be laboratories of renewable energy. It is possible. Just 3 weeks ago, Pa Dadi brought me to meet a very important innovator of this country. And our respected Pa, what is his name? Uh, from University of Indonesia, Pa Eko. And he has built an energy system where you can really have renewable energy. Now think of, Pa Dadi had visited how the religious spaces can collaborate with that. Think of if every school becomes a house of this renewable energy. It's so therefore, on the one hand, Indonesia, India are suffering from the inevitable climate collapse, but our dominant methodology is one of still reproducing the fossil fuel infrastructure. But we need a new educational and energy dynamics. And that is the great work that another great thinker, Berry, says that the great work is from moving from an extractive model of the world to a responsible model of the world. And finally, I would like to conclude with a few lines of a poem. Dear friends, you have sat together now for 1 hour. Would you mind standing for a moment and and holding each other hand, respecting the gender dimension in Indonesia? That means our male friends can hold male friends, women friends, and we will say these lines together. Okay? This is my notebook. Okay? We say together, this is my notebook. Many poems of questions, questions of relationships, questions of life, questions our meditations, flowers of sadhana in the blue sky, green earth, and our beds of love. Poems of questions in the edges of our lips. Questions embrace us, dissolve many boundaries of illusions and quick judgments. Questions make us naked. Open the lid of the golden pot, holding the hands of questions, and without any clothes, we touch each other. We become seekers of truth. Truth touches us. Embrace of questions. Quiet flows the dawn of transformation. Oh friend, let us go to the world with our notebook of questions. We will turn our creation into a notebook of questions, all the book of answers into book of questions. Gita, Bible, and the Holy Quran are not the Vedas of answers, neither Principia Mathematica nor the Kama Sutra, the final book of answers. All these books questions. We dance a tandava with question in our hands. Questions, questions. O divine question, you are the mother of our answers and also our love and creation. Answers emerge from the dance of Tandava, answers of and our ways of seeking and walking, not the last and only answer. What is the meaning of our life? Is this a society of duty? Is this worth the name of love? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
So much for Professor Ananta. Could you please maybe sit down here? Yeah, I think uh, we should be grateful that we have in this, and today we got a lot of valuable insight of our educations and the wholeness, how we should integrate education not only on cognitive way but also in spiritual emotions, and also how the schools need to make sure that they nurturing the unique characteristic of every student. So let's go to the question and answer sessions. We will open for I think two questions, one question first, and then if the time still value. Oh, you look have questions. Okay, so we're still waiting for the questions. If you have questions, just study for questions, and Professor will try to explain.
We have 15 minutes left.
Yes.
Have questions for 10 minutes. I will collect a few questions, then I will come after 10 minutes.
Okay. Okay. So, Professor said that let's you deliver your question first, or maybe for 3 or 2 questions, and then the next he will answer those questions in 10 or 5 minutes if you still have questions. Or is there any question from the back? No? Okay. Okay. So, since there is no questions, then maybe you can give the. Okay.
Like Ibu Titi, some questions, some reflections, like
Sorry, Palu.
let us have this opportunity. Discuss.
Thank you, Prof. Giri. Actually, I have a question for you. I mean, I can do imagine of teaching the art of wholeness in terms of primary education's level or kindergarten, but then how can we integrate this idea of the art of wholeness in education and learning in the higher education? That is all. Thank you. Daniabat.
Your good name again? Acha, Lokman, Professor Lokman. Yes.
Oh, I thought I can just tell you while you're in asrama, no? Well, a very interesting talk, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise on the. No, this is another take on the education. We've been, of course, trained and educated as scholars and teachers, and we've been doing that for a long time. Education means classroom, right? Classrooms and with all the writing, textbooks, and all that. But what I hear from you just now was that education can be more than just classroom. Is education is much more when you also include something like performance, even the inner spiritual parts of your students and things like that. So I think this is much much more interesting than when philosophy, social sciences. You mentioned a lot about sociologists and anthropologists into the mix, and I think that is very uh, important for our students, for our teachers to understand the future of education lay beyond just the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Dadi. Pak Nirban. And I would request our student friends to think of our philosophy.
Uh, Yes, I'm sorry about Nirwan. So we plan to have the time until 4:25. So maybe we can adjust the time.
Okay, it's a very fascinating presentation this afternoon. Uh, to be honest, I don't know actually the concept of wholeness, but that's why I give a little bit questions, a little philosophic questions. So how can actually to distinguish between a whole self and a fragmented self? And then in the context of education, how can we create the environment of learning that support a wholeness education? That is. Thank you.
So thank you, Pa. We still have 7 minutes. I'll just speak 5 minutes if you don't mind. We'll have one or two questions from here. So any friends from this side, please? Yourself? Some
Oh,
just introduce yourself. Some thoughts.
okay. Thank you for the chance. My name is Ayu. I'm the PhD student of Faculty of Education. And oh, well, I don't know what to say, but I guess it's a good topic anyway. You know, you are mentioning about the wholeness and then also the integrations of the educations because what is it? I know that education is a long process, and then people might think that a lot of people assume that education is only about the cognitive, I guess. And then, as a teacher and also a lecturer, maybe we need to, um, I don't know, like we need to relate it to our body, like our body and also the mind. So we don't only focus on cognitive, but we need to considering the other factors, I guess. Yeah, that's it from me, Pak.
Okay,
Thank you.
so we still have 5 minutes, and on 25, in the minutes 25, we will close the session, sir. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Thank you. So, thank you, all of you, for your gift of uh, thoughts and insights. Professor Lukman, thank you. And for example, how we can practice this in the higher education, like out of many kind of challenges of higher education is, for example, ethics education. For example, I'm just bringing one segment of it. For example, in business school, there is a subject of business ethics. And that is also related to Daddy's question. I want to give this example which can combine both these questions. That I have also done a study of values, ethics, and business almost 25 years ago. During that, I have studied in what way ethics is being taught in business school and how one innovative method was, first of all, in business school, which is mainly focusing on profit, and ethics in education is a kind of learning the art of connectivity, not just profit. Okay. And this teacher, this professor, S.K. Chakrabarti, he's a very deep thinker. You can find his books. And when I was visiting his classes in IIM Kolkata, he was following a methodology of each of the students writing a diary, okay, and then bringing it to the classroom. So therefore, uh, a practice like this. Another thing would be to have much more, what I was thinking, much more field-based, as some universities in Indonesia, some Islamic State university, they have practice of community education and university based education already there. So these are the ways in which something are happening, and we can bring more creativity to this. And therefore, Padadi, yes. So how important it is to have that learning, with and beyond the classroom. And how learning, because each of the moment is a learning moment, isn't it? And how do we create a process in which we realize that each of the moment is a learning moment? Okay. And that is also a creative practice. For example, I do a practice of creativity book. For example, I always have a book with myself. I meet people and I request them, please write some of your what you see. And I'm just concluding in a minute. Yes. So therefore, if we initiate such practice in the classroom, therefore in an educational institution, think of that each of the person, right from the sweeper to the rector, and each one of them, they have a task of maintaining a creativity book. Then once a month in our class, we read from our creativity books. These are possible. So therefore, that would also, contribute to realizing that each moment is a moment of learning, and it truly is, and how we can do that. Then, Pa Nirban, thank you. The fragmented self and the holistic self. That each one of us, that we are already a kind of a holistic self, like body, mind, each one of us, we are going through that. But because of a one-sided emphasis, we have become fragmented.
Okay,
So,
Hayden, I think
yeah, just concluding. And then how do we realize this? And finally, Ayu, yes, so therefore the emphasis on the cognitive, also it is not only bringing the physical and emotional to the cognitive, but also realizing many layers of the cognitive. For example, in Islam, there is a profound relationship between reason and intuition, isn't it? The mystical and the rational, they dance together. So therefore, because we are cognitive, that does not mean we have to be narrowly rational. Our cognitive also has a metacognitive dimension. Thank you so much. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
Okay, so thank you so much for Professor. Give applause, and after this we have a session for giving the souvenir. So is it Prof Nana will give the souvenir? Okay, so Prof, could you please? Okay, so for the token of appreciations will be given by Professor Nina. Could you please move forward, sir?
Thank you very much, Professor Puri, for sharing the knowledge to all lectures and students. Kenapa? Oh, backline? Oh, treatment. Backline? Saya di sini. Oh, di sini. Tadi. Thank you very much. Kita mau ngomong selesai aja. Thank you very much, Sahid. Dear students, we would like to use this room for 10 minutes meeting, and I would like to appreciate if you could leave